Four coronations. Four monarchs crowned beneath the weight of history. Decades spent standing just steps away from kings, queens, princes, and prime ministers. She witnessed some of the most significant royal moments ever recorded. Yet today, almost nobody remembers her name. While the world celebrated those who wore the crown, one remarkable woman quietly watched history unfold from the shadows. How could someone who stood at the heart of Britain's greatest royal ceremonies disappear from public memory? This forgotten story is far more extraordinary than anyone imagined. Before we begin, tell us what you think. Do you believe history remembers the right people, or are some of its most important figures unfairly forgotten? Let us know in the comments below. To help us create more videos and uncover the latest royal drama, please subscribe. Victoria's very ugly granddaughter. Few royal children have had their first public review delivered with such startling honesty. Yet those four words, written by Queen Victoria about one of her own granddaughters, would become one of the most memorable descriptions attached to Princess Marie-Louise throughout her long life. What makes the remark remarkable is not merely its harshness, but the fact that Marie-Louise herself later recorded it without resentment, as though she understood something about her grandmother that others often missed. By the time she reflected on those words, Marie-Louise had already spent decades witnessing the complicated world that existed behind royal walls. Born on the 12th of August, 1872, at Cumberland Lodge in Windsor Great Park, she entered a family that lived closer to power than most people could imagine. Her home was not some distant royal residence. It stood within the orbit of Windsor itself, close enough for the influence of Queen Victoria to shape daily life. Her mother, Princess Helena, was Victoria's fifth child, fiercely devoted to the Queen and deeply involved in her affairs. Her father, Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein, had effectively accepted that marriage into Britain's ruling family came with conditions. He settled in Britain and understood that the wishes of the monarch would often come before his own. In many ways, the household revolved around Victoria's expectations. As a result, Marie-Louise grew up in an unusual environment where family affection and royal duty were woven tightly together. One moment could be filled with warmth, the next with blunt criticism. Queen Victoria was known for speaking her mind, and nowhere was that more evident than in the telegram she sent after visiting her grandchildren. When questioned years later about her unflattering description of young Louise, the Queen reportedly offered a simple explanation: it was true. For many people, such a judgment might have become a lifelong wound. For Marie-Louise, it became a lesson. From an early age, she learned that love did not always arrive wrapped in gentle words. Within Victoria's vast network of children, grandchildren, cousins, and royal relatives, emotions could be sincere while still being painfully direct. Yet appearance was only a small part of her story. Far more important was the world she observed around her. From the corridors of Windsor, she watched a grandmother govern a global empire while simultaneously directing the lives of those closest to her. The experience taught her discipline, resilience, and an awareness that even the grandest institutions were more fragile than they appeared. Long before history remembered her as a royal witness to a changing age, Marie-Louise had already learned one of its hardest truths: that strength is often forged not through praise, but through learning how to live with honesty, however uncomfortable it may be. Was Marie-Louise's unsettling observation about Alex of Hesse merely childhood imagination, or a hidden warning of something deeper? What truly lay behind the strange shadow she claimed to see, and could those early signs have foreshadowed the fate that would later surround the future Empress Alexandra of Russia? Let's uncover the astonishing details. Glittering promise faded into silence. Her closest companion among the royal cousins was Alex of Hesse, the girl who would one day become Empress Alexandra of Russia. Even as children, there seemed to be something unusual about her. Years later, Marie-Louise would recall a strange shadow that appeared to follow Alex wherever she went. She remembered warning her young friend not to pretend to be sad so often, fearing that sorrow might someday answer the invitation. At the time, it was only a childish remark. Looking back, it felt almost prophetic. Yet while fate seemed to whisper around her cousin, Marie-Louise herself stood on the edge of what appeared to be a bright and fortunate future. Surrounded by royal connections and raised within one of Europe's most influential families, she seemed destined for a life filled with celebration, admiration, and security. One of the most memorable moments arrived during a grand family gathering in Berlin in November of 1890. Amid the glittering ceremonies and endless stream of distinguished guests, she met Prince Aribert. What began as a meeting between two young royals quickly attracted the approval of powerful relatives, including Queen Victoria herself. Within only a few weeks, on the 6th of December, their engagement was announced. The Queen expressed relief and happiness, believing that Marie-Louise had finally found a suitable match in a prince she described as kind and agreeable. The months that followed were filled with excitement. When the wedding took place at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, on the 6th of July, 1891, drew considerable attention. It was the first royal wedding held there since Prince Leopold's ceremony years earlier, making the occasion even more significant. Everywhere there were signs of hope and expectation. The wedding gifts alone seemed to tell a story of endless possibilities. Windsor Town Hall and Cumberland Lodge displayed a dazzling collection of treasures. Diamonds sparkled beneath the lights, pearls reflected elegance and prestige, and magnificent jewels arrived from relatives across Europe. There were necklaces, brooches, bracelets, and a remarkable tiara, each one symbolizing confidence in a future that appeared secure and brilliant. At just 18 years of age, Marie-Louise stepped into married life surrounded by admiration and promise. To those watching, the path ahead looked radiant. Few could have imagined how quickly that shining picture would change. The jewels remained, the memories endured, and the photographs captured the splendor of the day. But after the celebrations ended and she left for Dessau, something far less visible settled around her. The applause faded, the crowds disappeared, and the glittering future that had seemed so certain gave way to an unexpected silence. Those 5 words carried more weight than any royal decree, reaching a princess whose life looked like a fairy tale from the outside, but felt like a silent prison behind palace walls. What kind of rules turned royal life into restriction? And what truth was finally hidden beneath that perfect image? Let's find out. 5 words that changed a princess's fate. Those 5 words carried more weight than any royal decree. They cut through months of uncertainty and reached a young woman whose life had become far different from the fairy tale many imagined. To the outside world, Princess Marie-Louise appeared to have secured a brilliant future when she married into one of Germany's ruling houses. Behind palace walls, however, she was trapped inside a world governed by rules so strict that even the simplest human interactions required permission. Every movement was measured, every gesture was judged. A harmless greeting could spark criticism if delivered in the wrong way, at the wrong time, or to the wrong person. When she returned from England with boxing gloves and a punching ball, items that seemed perfectly ordinary elsewhere, they became the subject of whispered disapproval. The atmosphere surrounding her was one where individuality was viewed with suspicion and conformity was expected without question. Yet the most painful restrictions were not imposed by court officials. They existed within her own marriage. Years later, Marie-Louise would describe the relationship with heartbreaking simplicity, saying that she and her husband lived as complete strangers under the same roof. The distance between them grew so obvious that relatives began discussing it openly in private correspondence. Family letters from the period painted a bleak picture, portraying both husband and wife in deeply unflattering terms and revealing widespread concern about the state of their household. As the years passed, worries about Marie-Louise's physical and emotional well-being intensified. By the year 1900, nearly a decade after the wedding, the situation had reached a breaking point. Rumors swirled through royal circles, while conversations that could not be spoken publicly were hinted at in coded language. One particularly revealing letter from Crown Princess Marie of Romania suggested that Marie-Louise's husband and his elder brother shared what she called a horrible vice, a phrase many historians have interpreted as an indirect reference to relationships that, in Germany at the time, would have triggered scandal and legal consequences. Amid the growing crisis, Marie-Louise was advised to leave Germany for the sake of her health. Traveling quietly under the name Countess von Münster, she crossed the Atlantic and sought refuge in North America. Then the telegrams arrived. The first came from her father-in-law, the Duke of Anhalt, ordering her return. The second came from Queen Victoria. Faced with two commands, she chose the one that spoke not with authority, but with family. When she returned to Cumberland Lodge, another shock awaited her. A letter from her husband declared that life with her was intolerable and revealed his desire to have the marriage declared void. In that moment, the illusion of royal happiness finally collapsed, exposing a lonely reality hidden behind crowns, titles, and palace walls. At just 28, Princess Marie-Louise stood at a turning point. Few could comprehend her marriage shattered, her status uncertain, and her future hanging between duty and freedom. But what truly unfolded in the years that followed, and how did her choices reshape a royal legacy no one expected? Let's reveal the shocking details. The princess who returned alone. At just 28 years old, Princess Marie-Louise found herself facing a future no royal woman could easily imagine. The grand marriage that had once promised stability, status, and happiness had collapsed so completely that it left her standing between two worlds, neither wife nor truly free, carrying a title but burdened by questions that would follow her for the next 55 years. Yet the most remarkable part of her story was not the marriage itself. It was what happened afterward. When Marie-Louise returned to Britain, those closest to the royal court quietly understood that something unusual had taken place. King Edward VII delivered a remark that sounded light-hearted on the surface, but carried a deeper meaning, recognized by many who heard it. His words suggested that she had returned exactly as she had left, hinting at truths that polite society preferred not to discuss openly. Behind palace walls, the implication was clear enough. The marriage had ended under extraordinary circumstances. In December of 1900, the Duke of Anhalt exercised an ancient princely power that allowed him to dissolve the union through a family decree rather than through a conventional court. The decision was made without Marie-Louise's participation, without her approval, and without the protections normally associated with legal divorce proceedings. Her fate was effectively decided by others. The shock spread far beyond Anhalt. Determined to defend his daughter, her father sought advice from an English divorce lawyer. According to later accounts, the allegations filed against her were considered so offensive that the lawyer reportedly declined to read them aloud in full. Yet one detail stood out above all others. Infidelity was not among the accusations. That fact raised difficult questions and fueled speculation across royal and political circles. Tensions increased when her father allegedly threatened to reveal the true reasons behind the collapse of the marriage before the governing bodies of the German Empire. Whether that threat influenced events remains uncertain, but Kaiser Wilhelm II eventually accepted the dissolution. With that, the marriage formally ended, though many mysteries surrounding it remained unresolved. Back in Britain, Queen Victoria welcomed Marie-Louise as an innocent victim rather than a disgraced royal. Publicly, the royal family's dignity remained intact. Privately, however, the emotional cost could not be hidden. The young princess had lost not only a husband, but also the future that had been carefully planned for her. Perhaps that is why she never married again. Marie-Louise later wrote that she believed she remained married in the eyes of the Church of England. No later romance is known, and no second marriage followed. Instead, she devoted herself to duty, carrying forward with quiet determination. The princess who returned alone transformed personal disappointment into a lifetime of service. proving that sometimes survival itself becomes a royal achievement. She seemed to belong nowhere, neither fully within the old court world nor completely outside it, legally free yet emotionally tied to a marriage she still believed endured. But how did she survive such an identity void, and what drove her to quietly rebuild a life and purpose from complete absence? Let's unravel the details. A princess without a map. She was never given a template for what she was, neither fully inside the old court world nor truly outside it. Legally free under a halted law, yet emotionally bound to a marriage she believed still existed, she moved through life like a Victorian figure placed in an Edwardian age, without husband, household, land, or role. From that emptiness, she began to build something of her own. In London, she formed an independent home, quietly stepping into public service under the influence of her mother Helena, who had co-founded the Army Nursing Service and shaped hospital work with steady hands. She learned committee duties, visiting wards, and raising funds, turning duty into habit. Over time, her efforts grew into a wide network of patronages across hospitals, children's groups, arts bodies, and youth clubs, making her one of the most active non-reigning members of her extended family. In 1908, court notices confirmed her name as Princess Marie Louise, a small correction meant to prevent confusion with another Princess Louise of Argyll. Yet it also quietly marked her separate identity. Long before the world changed again, she had already chosen service as her path. When war arrived in 1914, she pledged herself to Britain without public speech, moving into Kensington Palace to support Princess Beatrice after the death of Prince Maurice at Ypres. There, she took charge of a 100-bed hospital in Birmanie, running it from 1914 until 1920, offering care in long, difficult years of conflict. In those wards, she chose a striking approach, wearing elegant dresses and hats instead of uniform, believing that wounded soldiers facing death should still see calm beauty and normal life around them. Later, she described this choice as a quiet form of mercy, where dignity mattered as much as medicine. Even without a clear title or defined place, she created meaning through steady service and personal courage, shaping a life that refused to be reduced by circumstance. In memory and record, she became a figure who turned absence into purpose and silence into action. Her work across hospitals and charities expanded slowly but steadily, reaching children's homes and art institutions across London and beyond, linking care with culture in unexpected ways. Colleagues often noted her calm presence during crises. When others hesitated, she continued forward, insisting that service was not a position, but a practice lived daily through action and attention to detail. In quieter moments, she reflected on how loss and duty had reshaped her path, yet she remained committed to the world she helped. A royal title stripped in 1917 changed everything for Marie Louise and Helena Victoria, leaving them with identities that felt suddenly unanchored. But what really lay behind this quiet royal decision, and how did being reduced to princesses of nowhere shape their place in history and the legacy they left behind? Let's find out. Princess. Forgotten silent legacy. Few royal lives move so quietly through history while shaping moments that still echo today. In 1917, the British Crown removed many German titles, changing the identity of several royals overnight. Among them were Marie Louise and her sister Helena Victoria, who suddenly found themselves left with only the simple style of a princess, without land or place attached. Marie Louise later spoke of this with dry humor, calling herself a princess of nowhere, a title that matched her uncertain position. Yet a far more painful duty arrived in 1918 when King George V asked her to carry devastating news across Europe. He informed her at Windsor Castle that Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their children had been killed, then placed a letter in her care for Princess Victoria of Battenberg. She traveled by sea to the island home of her cousin, where she quietly delivered the message through Louis Mountbatten, and remained for weeks in shared silence with Victoria. Each day, they walked the gardens together in the Isle of Wight, speaking almost nothing, yet offering comfort that words could not provide. Years later, Victoria would thank her for that quiet presence, describing it as the only form of strength she could endure at the time. But Marie-Louise's influence was not limited to sorrow, for in the early 1920s, she helped create one of the most remarkable miniature works in royal history. At the Royal Academy, she met Sir Edwin Lutyens and proposed an idea for a perfect miniature house offered as a gift from the people to Queen Mary. That idea grew into a massive project involving more than 1,500 contributors, from writers to craftsmen, all producing detailed tiny works of art. The finished creation, built between 1921 and 1924, included working objects, miniature books, and even tiny bottles filled with real wine. It now rests at Windsor Castle, admired by visitors who rarely realize the quiet woman behind its extraordinary design. A life defined by silence, duty, and imagination shows how one woman shaped both private grief and public wonder without seeking recognition. Her story remains a reminder that influence is not always loud, and that history often hides its most delicate contributions in plain sight. Some of the greatest legacies are carried quietly, without titles or applause ever remembered today. In 1937, Princess Marie-Louise made an unusual choice, purchasing a Cartier tiara for herself, rather than inheriting or receiving it through royal ties, then wearing it at a coronation despite holding no official role. What drove this bold decision, and how did a privately chosen jewel become a public symbol at such a historic moment? Let's uncover the intriguing details. A princess of her own making. In 1937, at 65, Princess Marie-Louise purchased a Cartier tiara for herself, not inherited, not gifted, not borrowed through marriage, but selected and paid for in Paris. The design, created in 1923 for Beatrice Forbes, Countess of Granard, carried diamonds, sapphires, and pearls rising in Indian-inspired shapes, later returned to Cartier in March 1937. That same year, she wore it to the coronation of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, turning the jewel into her chosen coronation diadem, despite having no formal household or official role. Years later, in 1953, Queen Elizabeth II sat beside her for a portrait, and Marie-Louise appeared wearing that same tiara, along with diamond bracelets given by her parents, her presence calm and deliberate at age 81. Between those moments, war changed everything around her. During the Second World War, she and her sister Helena Victoria were moved from central London to rented rooms near Ascot. They refused to sleep in air raid shelters, choosing instead to stay inside their damaged home even as bombers crossed the sky. After peace returned, they settled into a reinforced residence at 10 Fitzmaurice Place, near Caron Street, living simply with little staff and answering their own telephone, as if royalty had quietly stepped aside for ordinary life. In 1956, her memoir, My Memories of Six Reigns, was published, shortly before her death on the 8th of November that same year at age 84 in London. Her funeral at St. George's Chapel in Windsor drew unexpected crowds, including pearly kings and queens from East London who had worked with her for charity for decades. Even though some records misnamed her in death, her story remained clear to those who remembered her, a woman who shaped her own image with quiet resolve across changing reigns and uncertain times. Yet even in a world that often tried to define her by titles and lineage, she quietly refused to shrink into those expectations. The tiara she purchased in 1937 remained more than jewelry. It was a statement of self-direction, worn again in moments when history placed her under public gaze. In photographs from the early 1950s, especially the portrait with Queen Elizabeth II, she appeared composed not because of ceremony alone, but because she had built a life that did not depend on attention. Her years during the war near Ascot and later in the quiet building at 10 Fitzmaurice Place showed a different kind of nobility, one shaped by endurance rather than ceremony. When her memoir appeared in 1956, just weeks before her passing, it carried the weight of lived memory rather than official record. She had seen 6 reigns unfold and still chose simplicity over display until the very end. Her story stayed with those who knew her long after she was gone. How did a single Cartier Indian tiara, once chosen as a deeply personal adornment by Princess Marie-Louise and later preserved within the Duke of Gloucester's line, come to carry such weight across generations? What hidden royal choices and shifting fortunes allowed this jewel to silently witness decades of changing power and tradition? Let's find out. The tiara that remembered her name. Almost no one who sees the glittering Cartier Indian tiara today knows the unusual path that brought it into the royal collection and the woman who first chose it for herself. Marie-Louise once lived a life shaped by privilege and sudden loss after a foreign decree changed her future. Yet, she rebuilt her world with quiet strength beyond court expectations. Years later, the same tiara would pass to her godson, Prince Richard, later Duke of Gloucester, through a carefully arranged bequest that linked generations. At state occasions and even the major Cartier retrospective in London, in 2025, it's still shown on Birgit, Duchess of Gloucester, while few remembered its original wearer elsewhere. Within the same royal inheritance story, a diamond sunburst brooch moved to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, while a star brooch passed to Princess Alice, Duchess of Gloucester, who later sold portions of inherited jewels during the 1970s. Hidden among these glittering transfers was a pearl choker from Marie-Louise's parents, which could transform into bracelets and is believed by historians to have passed to Queen Elizabeth II, though it has not been clearly identified in public since many wedding gifts from 1891, including fringe tiaras, bow necklaces and bracelets from noble relatives, were later dispersed into auction catalogues, their origins quietly fading from memory. At Windsor Castle, Queen Mary Doll's house continues to attract visitors, though the small label beside it rarely foregrounds the woman behind its creation. Marie-Louise's life, however, unfolded far beyond royal display. She built a hospital, supported communities, and shaped a quiet legacy that outlasted titles or territory. Without bitterness or public plea, she secured her independence through careful negotiation and lived without a husband yet with purpose. She purchased one magnificent tiara with her own money, wore it across 4 coronations, and watched it outlast many who once tried to shape her destiny. Even in later media coverage, details of her life were often misrecorded or overlooked, yet her true measure emerged most clearly at her funeral inside St. George's Chapel at Windsor. There, the pews filled not only with royals and aristocrats, but also with pearly kings and queens from London's East End, alongside working-class volunteers she had supported for decades. Their presence reflected a life that transformed privilege into service and silence into lasting impact. Remembered as a woman who reshaped her own fate, she left behind jewels, institutions, and stories that continue to echo through royal memory across generations, still influencing perceptions to this very day. So what do you think could make someone attend 4 coronations, yet still be forgotten by history? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.